Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. My guest today is Danyal Rasool, who works for ESPN and Cricinfo. Welcome, Danyal, to the show.
Hello, Sagar. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So we're going to be talking about sports called cricket with Danyal today. So, Danyal, my first question to you as a guest is that why don't we start off from the beginning, and what's your about telling us what's your link to cricket?
So like I said, thank you for having me on. I think, I'm happy to start at the beginning. As you will know, and perhaps a lot of your listeners will know, like most South Asian families, you will always know someone who's very, very keen on cricket when you're growing up as a young child. For me, especially in Pakistan and India, for me, that was my father. And I think when I was 5 or 6 years old, the the 1999 Cricket World Cup was about to begin. And he kept talking about how excited he was. And that sort of drilled the excitement into my older brother and me as well. And once I started watching, I kind of fell in love with the sport. I began to play it in our backyard and then have friends around who used to play it. It was one of the most popular sports at school. And ever since, I've never really looked back. That, I think, is my formative link to cricket.
Oh, that's really wonderful to hear that. Can you tell us a bit more on why does cricket matter?
Yes. So cricket, it's something that you think about only a few countries playing, maybe a couple in South Asia, England, maybe a couple in Southern Africa. But cricket is, by some metrics, perhaps the second most followed sport in the world. I mean, that's controversial. But if you look at the bare numbers, India, it's by far the biggest sport in India, and India is the most populated country in the world, over 1.4 billion people, I think. Pakistan, another 200 million people, same with Bangladesh. So that's, I think, more than 2.5 billion people follow cricket worldwide. I think only football, soccer, that's the only sport that overtakes it comfortably in popularity. But there's also the sense at the same time that cricket hasn't really capitalized on the commercial and financial markets. It isn't commercially dominant like you would expect the second most popular sport to be. So it's a sport that's made a lot of money, that's made a lot of cricket boards and cricketers rich, but it's also exciting because there's so much more to go. There's so much untapped potential, even if you just look at these 10 or 12 countries that play cricket. And then once you talk about expanding it into maybe bigger markets like China and the US, you never know where cricket could go.
That's really interesting to know. But, how do you think, is the valuability of cricket is compared to other global sports in terms of both commercial and cultural manner?
Commercially, it lags behind sports that are definitely less popular than cricket, which is a problem for cricket. Cricket administration hasn't always been great at tapping into the right sort of potential to maximize their revenue. Just a small example, for example, the IPL, the Indian Premier League, is followed and watched in more countries by a comfortable margin than the NFL, which is the National Football League in the US. That's predominantly watched in the US and maybe a little bit in Canada and I think Japan. The IPL is watched around the world, across the cricket hemisphere, even Pakistan, where a lot of Pakistani players don't play the IPL. The IPL is followed in Pakistan too. But the average earnings of an IPL player versus the average earnings of an NFL player, the NFL players make way more. The NFL as a league makes way more. And that to me is a sign that cricket hasn't properly maximized its commercial potential. And that's maybe the direction cricket will head in the next decade or so.
That's very interesting to know. And what's the most exciting thing about cricket these days?
I'd say you get as many answers as people you talk to, but for me, it's the fact that there are 3 different formats of the same sport, which offer completely different kinds of challenges, different kinds of excitement, and frankly, drawing different kinds of fan bases. And all of them can be encompassed in one single sport called cricket. Test cricket is completely different to T20 cricket, ODI cricket. You have the ODI World Cup in India later this year, so that will be front and center now. ODI cricket requires a different skill set, different temperament. So I think there's very few sports, I can't think of any, that have three different styles of play, three different formats, and all can somehow still be subsumed into a single sport. I think that's a unique product that cricket offers.
Interesting, very interesting. Can you tell us a bit about, in today's modern world, what are some of the problems that cricket faces?
Some of its strengths are also its problems. I mentioned these three formats. One of the issues is that when you have when T20 cricket came in and took the world by storm, what it didn't necessarily do is draw in fans from elsewhere. It sort of cannibalized some of its own fans from the longer format. So the biggest issue I think with cricket is how these formats can coexist at the same time. Because of the commercial riches of T20 cricket, a lot of people just turn their back on red ball cricket, which is test cricket, and domestic cricket, which needs to test cricket. And so that means, in a way, the thing that was T20 cricket could end up becoming a victim of its own success, because the domestic pools that they draw from are not going to be there anymore, because people are not going to try and pursue test cricket. And that's where T20 cricket draws its recruitment from for the most part. So I think that's one of the problems. How can these three formats coexist rather than test cricket sort of fade into obscurity?
That's a pretty reasonable way to look at it. And in the follow-up question, I would like to know a little bit more about what sort of impact do the tensions between Pakistan and India have on cricket?
So this obviously, once again, this will vary depending on who you talk to. But for me, I think if you look at it dispassionately, the biggest one goes back to revenue. India is by far the richest cricket board, and larger than the others combined. I think the ICC, the International Cricket Council, the BCCI, the Indian Cricket Board, provides more revenue to the ICC than all the other boards combined. So I think they get the largest share of revenue. The issue is Pakistan and India, if they played, there'd be a huge commercial draw to them playing. But because they don't, and some of the reasons obviously aren't cricketing, they're political, but the reason when they don't play, that's a huge chunk of revenue that cricket misses out on. That's an opportunity that cricket kind of misses out on in terms of marketing the sport to a much broader audience. And you see that because when Pakistan and India play in the World Cup or the T20 World Cup, tickets sell out for that game, both in India and Pakistan. That's the most watched game. It's a game that's valued by both sets of fans a lot. But when there's this sort of natural tension between Pakistan and India, they're arguably the two most influential boards. I think it doesn't serve the cause of cricket that much, because if these two boards could find a way of working together, that would really help broadcast and promote cricket to a wider audience. Having said that, I accept that cricket can't solve that problem, because some of those problems obviously are rooted in things that have nothing to do.
What's it like to work in the world of sports as a journalist?
I enjoy it a lot. I know it was a dream job for me ever since I went to university. I went to university in Canada, which didn't really have too much of a cricket scene, as you can imagine. But I edited a university newsletter, and I just liked to write at that time. Cricket I wasn't the only sport I wrote on. I wrote on tennis, I wrote on football. But then, cricket was something I thought I'd been told I could write well in. And then I wanted to break in before I realized how intensely competitive the sports journalist market is. There are very few jobs, and there are hundreds of applicants for every job. Even now, I get messages from people all the time about how can I become a journalist, how can I break into sports journalism, and that was me about 7 or 8 years ago. And no one wants to hear, try not to pursue this is too competitive, you could make more money elsewhere. No one wants to hear. I didn't want to hear that. But I think it's a privilege, but it's also hugely challenging and hugely competitive, and that's where I leave it from that question.
That's very interesting and exciting to know. Like the world is so vast and so informative. So,
if I could quickly add to that point, the thing is, there's lots of jobs that are competitive in this way. Well, the thing that draws people, I think, to sports journalism is just this idea, almost a romantic idea, that you can just watch cricket or any sport on TV or maybe at a ground and get paid for it. Of course, that's a captivating sell, but there's a lot more to cricket. Sometimes I have to delve through boring legal stuff between what the ICC said, what the Pakistan Cricket Board said, what the Indian Cricket Board said. And when you're dealing with legalese, you think, oh, this is not what I signed up for. So the job is good, but it's not always exciting all the time. I think everyone should
but
know that.
Also in overall, like sports journalism is a huge business and it's a huge market.
Absolutely.
Moving on to my following question, where do you see cricket going in the next decade or so?
The thing is, it's really hard to say in some ways. The biggest challenge is whether international cricket can retain its relevance. At the moment, there's lots of T20 franchise leagues that have popped up. It's not just the IPL. Pakistan has their own league. The US recently started a league called the MLC, Major League Cricket. South Africa has theirs. Australia has the Big Bash League. And a lot of the time, when smaller international teams like Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, who can't pay their players as well, when they have an international tournament or series coming up, a lot of their players say, well, we could make more money just playing one of these leagues, so why should we make ourselves available to the national side? And so a lot of times, international cricket sees weakened sides and weakened squad play, and that devalues international cricket. One of the challenges the International Cricket Council faces, the ICC faces, is finding a way for these leagues to coexist with international tournaments, because at the heart of most cricket fans, I'd say, maybe not all, most cricket fans, international tournaments are the highest form of cricket there is. And while T20 leagues are entertaining, they should not completely eradicate international cricket. And I think that how that balance is struck will inform what cricket looks like.
So this is why we need to make it a regular occurrence, right? Which is only the time this is for.
Yes, so I would say there are regular tournaments, international tournaments, but a lot of the time they are not very high profile. A lot of people don't care unless it's a World Cup or what's called a Champions Trophy or a T20 World Cup. A lot of people just find they don't really care about international cricket, whereas they will follow the IPL quite religiously and a lot of the T20 leagues, whichever ones they like. One of the challenges is to bring context to international cricket, so every international tournament has some value that's assigned to it. In the same way the T20 leagues have a direct value that are assigned to it. If you win a match, you get through to the next match, you get through to the semi-finals or the playoffs, and then you win the tournament. International cricket needs that sense of purpose even when there isn't a World Cup going on. And that's the way to do that. They're looking at some ways to do that. They brought in a Test Championship League called the World Test Championship. They brought in an ODI League, which I thought was useful, but then they scrapped it. So that tells me they're finding for ways to search for relevance, but they haven't quite hit upon the magic formula yet.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and taking out your valuable time to do this. It was a really insightful conversation.
Yeah, I hope I was able to provide some value to your listeners. I enjoyed myself. Thank you for having me on.
Anytime. And let us do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do that.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.